Welcome to Black Spring. In this segment, we will take a look at a headline that sheds light on what many consider as a pandemic inspired persecution of blacks in South China. The segment will also feature two videos in which you will observe testimonies and accounts of daily life in South China at this time. And also you will have access to a second segment in which will include a bit of a 2016 commercial that speaks to the culture and to a bit of the demoralization and some of the other dynamics that contribute to racism and persecution as well in this segment. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And today our story comes from the New American, and it is entitled Scapegoated Over the Pandemic, Blacks Suffer Persecution in China. Now, this is written by Selwyn Duke. I'll do a bit of paraphrasing here, but China is very good at playing both the West and the race card, as evidenced by Beijing's claim that President Trump's China travel ban, is, quote, racist. But racism is something the Chinese know a lot about. Just ask the black people living in China, if you want to call it living. In fact, living on the streets is what African residents in Guangzhou, southern China, have found themselves doing after, quote, renters arbitrarily evicted them, hotels banned them, and restaurants refused to serve them food, end quote, reports Breitbart. This is happening because, quote, many Chinese in Guangzhou are blaming Africans from the pandemic, the site continues. Quote, multiple outlets citing locals in Guangzhou reported that the government has been arbitrary Chinese pandemic testing of black people and ordered restaurants and other services and businesses not to serve black people. Many who were tested say they are not given any results, so they have no idea if they have the pandemic or if they are carriers of the pandemic. Others say they are told that they tested negative, but are still forced into what amounts to a house arrest. And note that the Chinese of Guangzhou are not facing similar treatment, end quote. Now, the Chinese claim that a cluster of cases, at least 8, are linked to people who spent time in Guangzhou's Nigerian community known as Little Africa, and 5 of these are Nigerian nationals who allegedly broke quarantine, raising the ire of the local Chinese. Moreover, of the 114, quote, imported Wuhan virus cases as of Thursday, 16 are reportedly accounted for by Africans. The rest are Chinese nationals returning home. And so we continue. It isn't clear whether blacks residing in China have a higher infection rate than non-blacks, as is the case in the United States. In fact, nothing about China's numbers are clear because its government has been lying about the disease from the beginning. What is clear is that the infection began in China because of the nation's culture, governmental incompetence, and corruption, or both, and then spread worldwide largely, if not entirely, because Beijing covered up the epidemic. The regime has blood on its hands. Now, we'll go to the feature of the segment in which the government has more injustice on its hands. Quote, I've been sleeping under the bridge for 4 days with no food to eat. I cannot buy food anywhere. No shops or restaurants will serve me, end quote. France 24 quotes Ugandan student Tony Mathias, who was forced from his apartment last Monday, as stating, quote, we're like beggars on the street, the 24-year-old said. And we have this video available to you courtesy of Breitbart. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.
Huddled on cobbled streets with layers of clothing to generate heat under the cold skies of Guangzhou city. This is the new way of life for Africans living in China. The very color of their skin now means trouble, screaming of sickness to natives who bear a different skin tone from them. Africans have become subjects of racial profiling. Chinese nationals blame them for the rising number of new coronavirus cases in the country. They didn't want me to enter the subway. I had even bought my ticket, that was 4 yuan. And by the time I was going to the subway, they stopped me. And then they told me that no foreigner is allowed. And I was like, why? This is a subway. Then they say that that is the rule. Then who am I to argue with the locals? I complied. According to the Chinese Health Authority, 63 new coronavirus cases were reported in mainland China, with 61 of them described as imported cases. Brenda, not her real name, has been living in China since 2017. Earlier this week, she was kicked out of her home without any explanation. And just like any other person in a foreign country, the embassy is usually the next resort. For her, it was the Kenyan embassy. I did have a place to go. I had to sleep outside. Yes, I did sleep outside. The next day they came. I tried calling them. They were not actually responding to my call. What they told me, go to the police. I did that. After staying at the police station for a maximum of 3 good hours, they told me that we are sorry, we cannot help. She reached a dead end after 2 days of sleeping outside the embassy, a situation that many like her from other African nations have found themselves in. This video shows Chinese police officers escorting people of African descent from a place they had set apart for themselves. I know of 2 pregnant ladies. One is 8 months pregnant, the other is 6 months pregnant. They cannot access hospital. Patricia, also not her real name, was lucky to have escaped the eyes of Chinese nationals who came knocking in her house earlier today. Our conversation on phone revealing just how scary everything is.
So the women, they have come. Mimi nimejificha. So sahii niko kwa nyumba. The rest wametolewa, wanasema ati wanawapeleka quarantine for 14 days.
It will be the 4th day today that foreigners, especially blacks, are denied access to services in the city.
No, I don't have food. I don't know what to do. And I can't just go to the street. I don't want to sleep outside. Now it's either I choose to have somewhere to sleep or I choose food.
Our calls and even texts to Kenya's ambassador to China, Sara Serem, regarding the racial discrimination against Kenyan nationals have gone unanswered. These notices in Chinese, which translate to, this community is not accepting foreigners, especially black people. If you've rented a house to a black person, quickly get in touch and let them leave, have been the source of all evictions. And we are 3 there. Brenda got lucky. She is housed by a Zimbabwean national in this small space where they're living with one more person. She might be lucky, but a majority are not. They hope that the Kenyan government will come to their rescue before things get worse. Raquel Mugai, Citizen TV.
I thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring. And we will continue, and we'll go on to the second segment. Now, the second segment, we will deal with another element in the Chinese culture. Now, we'll continue here with realize that many, if not most, of the blacks in China are present because of predatory deals China made with African nations that are part of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. This is the fascist Chinese's no, they're not communist anymore scheme to dominate the world's shipping and transit routes. Yet China is taking advantage of African nations and furthermore sometimes treats Africans as second-class citizens in their own lands. There's also no shortage of articles about Chinese anti-black racism, such as the pieces here, 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 and here. Of course, there are many articles about American anti-black racism too, but in China's case, it's not entirely imaginary. To understand this racialist mentality, it is better to grasp the true threat China poses globally. It isn't only that Beijing's totalitarian regime doesn't have to worry about an ACLU lawsuit, it's also not just that its nation has nothing approximating Western political correctness, as the 2016 commercial below, which evoked much anger and evidences. Now, it's that general mentality it still aligns with what has historically been common, considering one's own culture and race superior. So I'll be happy to bring you this next segment of Black Spring with Autumn in the second video. Thank you so much for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. Now, for the two videos that were in this segment, we can see in the first example, that, of course, China seems to be pretty good, of course, at projection as well, because they've, all but accused President Trump and his policies as being racist. But they've got you see a little bit of evidence here. If that's not enough, you'll see evidence in other examples and other accounts in reference to the racism and the persecution of blacks in South China. Now, Guangzhou, China, or South China, was previously home to about 100,000 residents that actively traded, or that had a bit of a healthy mercenary culture and a bit of a camaraderie. Well, that city is more of a policed area, and it has been more known now to have more policing in the area, and checking and vetting and checking travelers for ID. And beyond that, it's also been named, in a derogatory way, it's been entitled now as the Chocolate City. So, and on to our second video in my tag there. This 2016 commercial actually conveys a bit of something that, of course, we've seen in America when it came to racism, or maybe 19th century types of blackface, or a bit of a minstrel show. I think there's quite a bit of symbolism where it comes to purification in this detergent commercial, and even I would even think it could even suggest that perhaps that the People's Republic of China, or the government, is seeking to, eventually to do a bit of an ethnic cleanse, and they are driving the African nations out while they are building their corporations and basically expanding almost to a point of what looks like a bit of an economic colonization, or a bit of an imperialistic colonization of the continent, or the countries in Africa. So I'd love to know what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that the Chinese are earning these reputations in controversy or racism, or do you think they are legitimately building these African nations, or are they building them with the intentions of making them more independent, or making them more autonomous to be successful? Or do you think that they are basically using Africa as mere stepping stones? And as always, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. If you could hit the like button, or unlike, or even the subscribe button, and even share, you would certainly help the platform and the growth of Black Spring. Thank you so much for tuning in.